across the microphone is one of the most stimulating and certainly one of the most unconventional of contemporary philosophers, Dr. Alan Watts, who perhaps is the most articulate spokesman for what is known as Zen Buddhism. Now, we know we've heard the name a great deal in recent years, and for, I'm sure, quite legitimate reasons, there's been an increase of interest in Zen in many parts of the country, in America particularly, as well as in other countries. Dr. Watts, what is Zen?
You know, if I answered you and tried to make it clear, it would be a hoax. In other words, it's true, I talk a lot about it. I wouldn't like to call myself a spokesman for it, because I'm not trying to sell it. In other words, I'm not trying to convert anybody to Zen. Strictly speaking, Zen's a form of Buddhism, Chinese form of Buddhism, which now prevails mostly in Japan. And it's had a great influence over the centuries on all kinds of aspects of Chinese and Japanese culture, especially on painting and architecture and the designing of gardens. But if I were to speak really properly about Zen, I might just keep silent for a few minutes. And actually then one would understand it better than if I tried to make it clear. But as I'm going to have to talk with you, and you know one talks on the radio, we're going to have to confuse everybody by trying to tell them what it's all about.
But isn't there an element of communication that is needed here? As you said a moment ago that silence, some time of silence would help explain Zen more than words would.
Yeah.
Now, I, who talk a great deal, perhaps talk too much, don't quite dig this. And I'm trying to, I want to understand what you're telling me. Now, isn't communication, is silence a form of communication then?
Well, a lot of other kinds of communication go on while you're silent. There's a Chinese proverb which says, "One showing is worth 10,000 sayings." In other words, if I were to ask you, what this is, you would say it was a match booklet, but match booklet is a noise, and this isn't a noise. If I really want to show you what this is, you see, I have to do this. That's what it is.
Because we're on the air.
Yes.
But suppose we were on television, then you say one showing is worth 10,000 sayings.
Yes.
But on TV, then, would our conversation take on a different coloration? Or not shall we say our communication rather than conversation?
We can do it just as well on radio. Because there's all the difference in the world between the word clap and that.
Between the word and the sound.
Yes. I mean, in other words, whatever as Korzybski said, whatever you say a thing is, it isn't. Because a word only stands for it isn't it?
The word is the label.
The word's the label.
The actuality is something entirely different.
That's right. Now, part of the function of Zen is to wake people up to that. Because as soon as we begin to talk and to begin to think in words, we begin to confuse the signs with what they point to. And, supposing you started eating the menu instead of the dinner. Or like people with money, Money is not good for anything except papering the wall, if you consider money as anything more than a mere symbol of wealth. But you know how it is, you go to the supermarket and you buy the groceries for the week, and this long spiral of paper keeps coming out of the cash register, getting longer and longer and longer and longer.
Yes.
You tear it off, $30, please. And you part with $30
Yes.
and feel crestfallen, but you don't notice what you got in the basket. That's the reality, but you parted with the money. Now, if you get crestfallen because you got the goods in the basket and you lose the paper, you're upside down. And you see, that's what happens. We start confusing the real world with the signs for it, with the names for it. And so begin to live in words instead of in reality.
So then the credo, perhaps this is wrong using the word credo. The idea of Zen is to acquaint human beings with the fact instead of the symbol, with the reality instead of the label.
That's right. It doesn't it doesn't say that labels are a bad thing, but only bad if you confuse them. For example, here's another way in which people confuse the label with the reality. There's an abstract something or other called the future. Future isn't here. Nobody can, pick up right now the Chicago paper for the day after tomorrow. You see, it's just not here. And yet most people are living for it. In other words, doesn't matter how well you're situated at the moment. If there's a good time coming, you feel good. If there's not a good time coming, you feel badly. Because you're reacting to the future instead of reacting to now.
Does Zen say, now is it?
Now is it.
If I may, for the moment, interject a comment. This is it. If I may, no, I didn't mean, this is not a deliberate plug, but it's connected with the next question. This is it is the newest book
That's
by
right.
Alan Watts. It's Pantheon. Now, this was based upon an article, was it not? A rather definitive
Yes,
article.
the first-
The Chicago Review.
No, that's included in the book.
That's included in the book.
But the title is taken from an essay at the start of the book.
This is it.
Yes.
Now, is this is it a reference to now?
Yes. This, meaning what is here and now, is it. And when we use the word it in the sense of a superlative, the it than which there is no itter.
So that as far as tomorrow is concerned, does Zen say, let tomorrow take care of itself when it comes?
Not quite. The point is rather this. There's no use to make any plans for tomorrow unless we can be here now. Because when the plans mature, and the thing you've planned for works out, and it comes true, and you got it, if you're not there for it, you can't enjoy it. You're busy planning for something else next week. So you're always like that donkey who's got a carrot hung from a stick that's fastened to his collar. So that's the future, that carrot. And by pursuing it, you never get it.
Yeah, you forgive me. I'm thinking of something else aside from that donkey and carrot. Thinking that guy on that Grecian urn that Keats wrote about, chasing that girl, and the ode to the Grecian urn.
Yeah.
And he's described as fortunate youth, but he never quite gets her, you know?
No,
So I wonder, he's not really with it, is he?
not really, no.
Because there's no now for him. The only now is frustration.
That's it, yes. So, but you see, the future is an idea in our minds. It's a useful idea, but it's only useful if you can be here fully.
Well, is Zen anti-planning? Let me put it this way.
No, it's not
Yeah.
anti-planning. It would say, let's put it in its place. It isn't, the whole of Buddhist philosophy is not really an exclusive point of view to say there are certain, human beings say should stop thinking, should stop planning, should stop this, that, and the other. It only wants to subordinate doing those things to what is really important.
It's a question of values, then, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a question of placing too much emphasis on what may be a phony value, really, isn't it?
Yes. And confusing the word with the reality.
How can a man in the Western world, a man living in Chicago, with the pressures being what they are in our world and our society, practice Zen and be the happier man as a result of it now? Is that possible? Or is it theoretical?
Well, I believe you asked the wrong question.
Perhaps I did.
Now, let me tell you a story. There was once a man, he was an American, he was traveling in England, and he wanted to get to an obscure village called Little Tuddenham. And he asked a yokel where it is. And the yokel scratched his head, and after a while he said, well, sir, I do know where it is, but if I were you, I wouldn't start from here. So, in the same way, if you look upon Zen as something to be applied in a kind of do-it-yourself, self-help way, to make to improve your life, you see, that's asking the wrong question.
That's not it.
You see, it's just because one is looking all the time to improve it, to be other than where you are, to get something out of life as if it were different from you. That's what makes the trouble.
Is this what you mean by square Zen?
No. That's just this is just ordinary attitude to life.
Yes.
I mean, if somebody
Yeah.
takes up Zen to use it that way,
Yes.
that's neither
Has the answer to personal problems.
yes,
This is not it.
no. Now, but it's perfectly natural to do that, you see. Like when you go to a psychiatrist. There's a good saying, anybody who goes to a psychiatrist ought to have his head examined. And so in the same way with Zen. Anybody who studies Zen, as the old master said, deserves 30 blows with a stick.
Anybody, I want to follow that now. Anybody who studies Zen
Yes.
deserves 30,
30
blows with a stick.
yeah.
Do you mean he should not study Zen?
In the
Or-
same way
Yes.
about the psychiatrist. Does this mean he shouldn't go to a psychiatrist? You see? It's the same problem. If somebody thinks he's got a problem, and what he thinks is the problem is this: I find I'm trapped by life, and I want to get out of the trap. I want to get out of trouble. I want to get out of suffering. I want to be happy. In other words, fix me.
Yes.
This is what he says.
Fix me. Yes.
Same way as a person saying to a psychiatrist, I want you to help me.
Well, you use the verb fix. That's rather interesting. Fix me.
Yeah.
As a drug addict might say. He wants
Yes.
his fix.
Sure.
Fix me.
Yes, he wants his fix.
And this one is as unrealistic or as unhealthy as the other. Or is that a bad word to use? Unhealthy. Unhealthy in that it is not.
Well, it's unhealthy in
Yeah.
the sense that the person doesn't really know what his problem is. A person, say, who goes, again, using the example of the psychiatrist, this is one profession in which the customer is always wrong. In other words, the question he asked in the first place was the wrong question, you see. And eventually, through therapy, he comes to ask the right question.
Now then, since we've gone around the circle, and I'm enjoying this, by the way, very much, Dr. Watson. Suppose I word this differently now.
Yeah.
And not word it differently, because again, it's not a question of words, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
But suppose the idea or the fact is different. Why is Zen? Why has Zen become as popular as it apparently has become in the Western world in recent years?
Well, there are a large and complex number of reasons. First of all, I think one of the main difficulties from which we suffer, particularly in modern civilization, is the sense of personal loneliness. Everybody, you see, believes that as an individual, he's a kind of a mind or a soul inside a bag of skin. And that thing inside the bag of skin is completely different from what's outside. In the words of Hausmann, the poet, I, a stranger and afraid, in a world I never made. And this is the feeling that is psychologically called alienation. And when we so hate to be alone, for example, to be just sitting undistracted by radio or literature or something, noise going on, because when we're alone, we feel more and more isolated, and so try constantly to run away from ourselves. The appeal of Zen, in one case, is that it proposes a change in one's basic consciousness of one's own existence, so that you realize that what you are is not only what is inside your skin, but also what is outside.
Because of this growing sense of alienation, stranger in the world never made, as
That's
so
right.
many feel, as practically I imagine
Yes.
every sensitive human being must
Yes.
feel. This philosophy, you would describe it as a philosophy, would you not, or a religion?
It's really, I call it a way of liberation.
a way of liberation.
Of liberation from the illusion of being only inside your skin, of being a separate self that's quite different from everything else in the world. It's liberation from that sensation.
Liberation from the conventional way of thinking,
That's right.
that one is a separate self.
Yeah.
What he is really is part of a larger whole, a larger entity.
Yes, he's one with the whole world of nature, and he's a particular expression of it at a particular point. Of what every one of us, we might say, is a particular expression of it, and it is the whole show.
Now, a question. There are so many questions, but one. Assume he is part of this one whole. Let's assume he feels there is a great deal wrong with the world that he, as a human being, would like to right.
Mm-hmm.
Let us say that other humans feel as he does. Let's say, for example, fallout,
Yes.
objection to nuclear testing. What is that? I don't mean to get political here. I just mean, I'm thinking now of position, if he is part of a whole,
Yes.
does he do something to set the whole straight? Is that within the realm of Zen?
He can only influence the whole really constructively if he first feels himself to be one with it. In other words, in order to change the world technically, by technological or other means, it's terribly important, first of all, to recognize that the world is your own body. If you don't feel that, you attack it. And we talk about the conquest of nature, the mastery of nature, the conquest of space, the conquest of Everest. What a fight we've got on with it. And then, if you go at nature making an attack with a bulldozer, or with, you don't like mosquitoes, so just throw DDT on the lot. And suddenly you find you've upset the balance. And you've got problems on your hands. Because you didn't reverence the external world as your own body. When you love it, when you feel yourself one with it, you are fit to control it, but not before.
Be a friend to nature rather
Yes.
than enemy to it.
Yes, it's one's own body.
But back, if we may, to the DDT and the mosquitoes. In this world we live in, life being real and earnest,
Yeah.
what of the mosquitoes, let us say, causing discomfort to the human being?
The point is that it's true, we kill the mosquito when it bites us, or sometimes before it bites us, just as we have to kill something to eat. Life is like that. What I'm pointing out is, don't kill indiscriminately. Don't use violent, unintelligent methods of controlling the world, because you can't push it around without pushing yourself around as well. It's all balanced. And this is the point of feeling nature as yourself. There's a Chinese saying, that when the wrong man uses the right means work in the wrong way. So when the man who feels alienated uses technology doesn't work properly. It just creates problems and bombs. Only the man who feels no longer alienated, cut off from the world, is fit to use technology. Same way as only the man who lives fully here and now has any use for any plans for the future.
So we come to the matter of technology itself, technology and Zen. You say technology can be used well. You are not a chartist, of course.
Oh, no.
Technology can be used well, but again, it's the question of man knowing himself.
Of who's using it, yes. What kind of man? Whether he's a crazy man or a sane man.
And we have to deal with this, don't we, today? With
Yes, this is the great
sanity
problem.
and insanity.
And so, you see, for this reason, this is, I think, one of the causes for an interest in not only Zen, but all kinds of Chinese and Indian philosophy on the part of Western people. Now, mind you, too, these philosophies in Asia have only been the concern of a very small minority of people, and haven't very profoundly influenced the whole culture. We can't point to India, or we can't point to China as an example of the practice of these ways of life.
And yet, isn't it true that, say, Dr. Martin Luther King was influenced to a great extent by Gandhi, who in turn was influenced by Thoreau, I suppose, I imagine, would he not?
Oh, yes.
Well, then, hasn't there been an influence here to some extent? It does have an effect.
Oh, yes, it does. I mean, but what you find generally is that the aspect of the philosophy which has a wide influence is a bit of a caricature of it. I mean, just think what very many so-called average people think about Freud. Their ideas of Freud are a caricature of what he said. And so in the same way, the Buddhism practiced in China or Japan will be to a very large extent a caricature of the real thing.
Now, if we may come to this matter of caricature of the real thing, this article, I liked it very much. It's stimulating, and I believe I understood it. This excellent one you wrote, that is included, and this is it. And this was in the Chicago Review of 1958. Beat Zen, Square Zen, and Zen. Now, there are three different approaches. One is the legitimate approach. Would you mind, I'm going to ask you about beats in a moment, Or what about it? Even now, the word beatnik itself has been being used by the press in quite
Yes.
unfair and terrible ways. It has made they're equating it with criminal, really, at times.
Yes.
The press, or with crackpot. Now, beats, as we know them, beats, whether beat novelists or poets, have been associated with Zen. At least they use the word. Are they justified in using it? Are they applying it properly?
Not exactly, no, because the kind of popular Zen for which there's a bit of a fad in the United States is again a caricature. On the other hand, I don't want to condemn it outright, because figure this a moment. The Beat generation, to the extent that it really exists, is the only going rebellion in the United States today, aside from the race question. And therefore, this is the only rebellion, and therefore, at least for that, it deserves some respect. It's true that it has all kinds of wild excesses, and that, say, Jack Kerouac's book, The Dharma Bums, the kind of Buddhism that it portrays is pretty goofy. Although Gary Snyder, the man who's the hero of the book, actually, the poet, he practices Zen in a very orthodox way. He's now studying it in Japan, in a monastery.
The actual
hero of that book. So you see, within this term, Beat generation, there are all kinds of things, wildly assorted. But there is, it seems to me, a certain value, however excessive it is, however gauche, in this protest against our rather smug way of life, and in a kind of, you see, it's going over to the other extreme. It's going over to extremes of irresponsibility. And this is the way things work. They always go back and forth, and the hope that we'll find a balance.
In that your defensive beat is certainly an eloquent one, in that it's anti-complacency, and complacency probably is the prime boil of our day, one of them. But you point out in the article that the manner of seeking Zen it's to follow a caprice, a sort of the hell with it idea. If I follow you correctly here in this article, and you inferred this was wrong, just as the square Zen, we'll come to that in a moment, is wrong, and seeking to find another way of being conventional.
Yes. In other words, if you just follow caprice, this is not the same thing that is meant in Zen by spontaneity. True spontaneity is not something that can be imitated. And true spontaneity can only be found after a discipline. Now let me go back and perhaps make that clearer by something we talked about a little earlier. We were discussing the point that a person who goes to study Zen to get something out of it has made the wrong approach, but it's inevitable that he do so. And he's made the wrong approach because what is, according to Zen, his problem is his conception of himself as this separate being who wants to get something out of life. And so the teacher teaches him Zen by challenging that conception of himself, and says to him in effect, if you are a real separate self, I want to see you. Show me you. Show me that individual, detached self you believe yourself to be. Don't tell me what it is. Show me. Make it concrete, because if it's real, then I can see it. This could be put in another way. Be deliberately spontaneous. In other words, if you are free and you are separate, you ought to be able to be spontaneous. Be it. The student attempts to do this. Now, supposing I challenge you, do something spontaneous. It's like putting a child in the middle of the floor and saying, with all the relatives around, now dear, play. Or it's like, as a Hindu proverb, that if you think of a monkey while you're taking medicine, the medicine won't work. So try not to think of a monkey while you're taking the medicine, you see. the same bind.
Yeah, it's a bind indeed. Go ahead.
So the discipline is that he finds out by repeated trial that he cannot be deliberately spontaneous.
No one can be deliberately anything then, can he?
Exactly.
And be natural.
Exactly, like being deliberately sincere.
Yes.
Be sincere, you know.
Well, you have often on radio you hear midnight disc jockeys saying, "He's a dear friend of mine. I mean that sincerely." That's one word. It's hyphenated. You see.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But then, if he's challenged, we're all challenged with the thought of sincerity. What do we really mean? When we get right down to it, we find at the bottom of our sincerity a good deal of trickery.
Here again are labels, aren't there? Isn't this the matter of label again?
Yeah.
The word. And how, of course, well, before we come to that, the other
So
one-
the point
Oh,
is,
yeah.
though, that by finding out that everything he thought hitherto was spontaneous and free action was phony, he comes to a great psychological crisis in which he sees that he doesn't really have a self.
Pardon me, Dr. Watts, you say he comes to a crisis in which he sees he does
doesn't
not
really
have
have
a
a
self.
He can't produce it. He can't produce this independent, spontaneous, perfectly genuine act which the teacher challenges him to produce.
Is Zen then saying, I'm curious now, I'll be the gadfly for the moment
Yeah,
here. The gadfly because I don't quite understand. Is Zen here saying that there is no such thing as man unique? Is not each individual one self I sing, said Whitman, you know? Is Zen the opposite of, I mean, isn't each individual unique? Isn't each a complete and separate
But
person?
in the same way that each finger is unique. And each finger is unique and can move separately just because it's joined to the hand. If you cut the finger off, it has no power left. Its uniqueness, its life has gone. So in the same way with man. If he really were the way he feels himself to be, he'd be a dead duck. Fortunately, he isn't that way. He is connected with the whole world of nature.
And with the whole world of man, too.
Yes.
Then he is an individual. He is unique up to a certain point. He is that.
Yeah.
As a finger is unique. But he is part of a whole larger body.
That's right.
Yes, that's what I remember Preacher Casey in Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. I guess we're all part of one big soul.
Mhm.
Back to other aspects of Zen being misused. And we'll come back. Beat the beat, then, as you say, you have no intention of attacking it, since rebels are needed.
Yes.
And they're rebels. What of you use your phrase square Zen? I hear as someone who is a status quo figure who seeks to practice Zen.
Well, this is what I would call simply the imitation of Japanese Zen in its most orthodox form. There are Americans who take up Zen just as it is in Japan. And I feel that this is exotic. In other words, just in the same way that tea has become a very normal part of our culture. So I wish Zen would seep into our culture as tea has, in a very natural way.
We'll take it and see.
Because, yes, I mean, you know, what happens, will happen if we imitate Japanese Zen is that Japanese people will come over here and build Zen monasteries in very classy Japanese style, and there will be an exceedingly exclusive and
Yes,
snobbish cult
Yes.
of that kind of thing. And I feel this is unnatural.
So again, we come to naturalness. The word, isn't the word here, isn't one of the key, again, using word, the key idea.
Yes, is natural.
Naturalness.
Yes, or as it's called, I like it in its literal form, in Japanese, buji, which means nothing special,
Nothing special.
nothing affected.
And so a loss of self-consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing special. Now we come to another aspect. In here, you mentioned in this excellent article, now I'm sure in This Is It, that it's a human thing, it's a natural thing, it's an ordinary man idea, in contrast to the practice of Indian philosophy, the yoga,
Yes,
for example.
that's
When you
right.
refer, there's a very definite difference. In one, there's a very harsh discipline involved.
Well, there's a discipline in Zen
Yeah.
too. But the ideal is in a way perhaps different, or different from some kinds of Hinduism. That is to say, I remember an old Zen master saying, if I have any ideal at all, it is to become a complete human being. Not a Superman. In other words, you don't make a perfect circle by turning it into a square. So in a way, you don't make a perfect man by turning him into something that's not human. So, but nothing special doesn't quite mean natural in the sense of, lacking color or being ordinary. It doesn't mean that at all.
Not ordinary in a pavement sense.
And it doesn't mean affected naturalness, as when a person plays the role of being a regular guy. You know, Joe College and all that sort of thing. It's not natural in that sense either. It's the naturalness of a person who is no longer, he's been through this disciplinary mill, and he's found out through trying to be independent and to be separate that it's impossible. So he gives up. And with that giving up, he, as it were, he gives up himself. In other words, his selflessness is not an act of virtue. It's realizing that we have really nothing else that we can be.
I mean, there is no need for him to justify himself. He need not be, there's no self-righteousness
That's right.
involved here.
That's right.
What of the matter of right and wrong, of evil and good? Does Zen see both of these as part of two sides of the same coin?
It is often said that Zen is beyond good and evil. That doesn't mean it's against them, or against ethical standards. The point is, however, this. Zen people do not feel that the great universe is on the side of good as against evil, or evil against good. You go out and look at the stars at night. You don't criticize the constellations for being well or badly arranged. They're just wonderful as is. And we live in that world too, the world of great nature. You don't criticize the valleys for being low or praise the peaks for being high. And so there are heights and depths of man that are just like that. But there is another, as it were, more restricted world in which good and evil are important. But I would think that in Zen, or in any form of Eastern philosophy, you would consider the rules of conduct like the rules of grammar. We have to keep the rules of grammar to understand each other, so we have to keep the rules of conduct in order to get along together. But if you call in, say, God to take the side in moral disputes, and you put God on the side of the good, this is doing too much.
And this is the good as one side sees it.
As one side sees it. Again, to quote a Chinese proverb, don't swat a fly on a friend's head with a hatchet. The instrument's too powerful. And
we have powerful instruments today,
yes.
more powerful than a hatchet.
Yes.
Then, of course, this is the leading question, of course. You see Zen perhaps as more applicable today, more necessary, I suppose, than ever before in the history of, very checkered history of humanity.
Again, if you ask me,
Yeah.
is it necessary?
Uh-huh.
You see, this puts it back into the utilitarian form of discussion, of, trying to get something. Yes. And it's only when this feeling of isolation from the rest of the world, which results in our trying to battle the world and knock it into shape, it's only when that goes that Zen is intelligible.
There's a metaphor you use somewhere in the article here about as a cork upon the waters.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? You mean to be as buoyant and as natural as that is?
In a way, notice that when the cork and the water move in perfect unison, the cork doesn't wait for the water and then follow it. In other words, there's no hesitation between the movement of the wave and the movement of the cork. They go together. Now, this isn't a symbol of the passivity of the cork to the wave.
I was about to ask that.
It's a symbol of the perfect unity of the two movements. It's like two dancers who have danced together for a long time, know each other very well, and as a result of this, it is no longer apparent who is leading and who is following. They just dance together like one body. This describes as a metaphor for the way it feels when your consciousness is changed through this sort of discipline. When you feel one with your environment. You don't feel that you are pushing the environment around. You don't feel that you're being pushed around by it. You feel you're moving together like dancing partners.
So it's not a way of life of resignation.
No.
I mean, there's not resignation
No.
or passivity
No.
involved here at all.
That's right.
Rather, a oneness with
It's a oneness of the organism man with the environment nature.
a question. I'm just thinking again of beat Zen, square Zen, and individuals, people seeking a solution to their problems and not finding it because they are seeking it. I'm thinking now, we speak of Oriental philosophy, its effect on the Western world. Assume a case of a young Buddhist in Tokyo, a boy, who finds things that his people are pretty complacent. Is there a danger he's becoming a square or beat Christian? I'm just thinking, can the shoe be put on the other foot here?
I wouldn't quite make this comparison because Zen and Christianity are not comparable. They're not two things of the same kind. I call Christianity a religion, but Zen a way of liberation. It's like, if you had a book on birds and you suddenly came across a chapter on rocks, you wonder, this book kind of mixed up. So in the same way, when I read a book on comparative religions, I get that feeling because they include things in it which, if you call them all religions, the word's too big to mean anything.
Here again, the label on the word is wrong.
Yes, Zen is much more like psychotherapy. It isn't exactly like it, but it's more like it. And I don't think we would talk of psychotherapy or Christianity as alternatives. Or in the same way, Zen is like the art of the oculist. He corrects bad eyes. Zen corrects out-of-focus minds.
Then what of Zen and psychiatry?
It's a funny thing. There's a big 2-volume book just come out called The American Handbook of Psychiatry. It has a full article on Zen in it. Not, as you might think, listed under current mania, but under contributions from related fields. It also has a full article on various forms of Oriental philosophy. And I've spent much of my time in the past 5 years going to medical schools and speaking to the staffs of psychiatric hospitals, both here and in Europe. And there's a tremendous amount of interest in this sort of thing among the psychiatrists. Now, there are a large number of reasons for it, but it basically comes down to the fact that the psychiatrist is becoming more and more interested in the possibility that what we call the normal conception of human personality and the normal state of self-consciousness may not be the only possible one, or may not even be the healthy one.
You mean normal as we have
Normal
been
as
conditioned
we
to know
understand it, yes. In other words, I often think, a psychiatrist's idea of reality, especially the kind of psychiatrist who's afraid of this sort of thing. Reality is the world as seen on a bleak Monday morning. Face it, boys, And they're terribly anxious to preserve this conception of reality. But there are other psychiatrists who are not the square psychiatrist. The square psychiatrist, he is the apostle of the official reality.
Yes.
And if you don't feel a reality in the official way, you've got to be a
He
head
says
drunk.
adjust, does he
Yes,
not?
adjust.
To
Then
what?
To the official version of reality. But the creative psychiatrist realizes that the official version of reality is what's crazy.
Yes.
And the difficulty of the people who go psychotic is they can't stand the official version of reality. Poor things. But there might be some more constructive way of doing this than going nuts.
It seems to me there should be. Then Zen, I don't want to use the word plea again, Zen is a way of life that may call for, I'm about to use the word not malady, but non-adjustment, shall we say. Non-adjustment to what may be a reality that may be really cockeyed.
Yes. In other words, of course, in Zen one wouldn't speak of adjustment anyway.
No.
Adjustment of what to what?
No, I use the
Yes.
word non-adjustment
Yes, I know.
for lack of another phrase.
Sure.
What of Zen and the arts? You mentioned Japanese Zen has come to the fore in the Western world as a result of the increased interest in Japanese paintings primarily.
Yes, Zen has had a great deal of influence on painting. And you see, anybody who practices a skill, an artist, an archer, a fencer, a potter, a cook, an automobile driver, everybody can apply Zen to a skill. And what it is, something like this. You remember, did you ever learn to ride a bicycle?
No, I never did. You spoke to the wrong man.
Did you ever learn to swim?
No.
Well, what did you learn to do?
I can't.
Something
I must
could
tell
think
you
of.
this. I must make confessions. You've asked it. I've never driven a car in my life. I've never been on roller skates. I can't swim, can't ride a bicycle, can't dance.
Gee.
But so I thought you should know this since.
Well, I'll tell you what
may
you
have
can
an
do.
offbeat one.
You can talk,
I can talk. Yes.
and very easily. I don't know if you remember when that first happened. When you suddenly found you were speaking. You don't remember that? Or that you had a gift of interviewing people.
I don't remember any the time specifically.
Because you see, there's a funny moment where you get the knack. When suddenly it seems the bicycle is riding itself. Now, the artist will practice his control of a brush, especially if you have been brought up as a child to write Chinese characters and you write with a brush all the time. You practice and practice and practice to get control. And then one day, you get the feeling that the thing does itself. Now, this, in the same way, the Zen artist works very hard at mastering a technique. And then when he's got the technique, he gives himself up to whim. And he lets it do it.
Once he has the craft mastered, once he has the technique mastered, he gives himself up to
To whimsy.
whim.
Yeah.
He feels completely free, but does he not have a concept? Let us say he's a very skilled painter, very skilled. He gives himself up to whim in each of his projects, on each of his projects. I mean, does he not have, say, a concept?
Say he has a simple idea
Yeah.
that he's going to paint
Pardon me.
a certain theme. But he will allow accidents to come in. And this is what one Japanese artist called the controlled accident. He will allow all sorts of accidents to happen through the structure of the brush, it running rather dry and creating hairlines which show tremendous movement and dynamics on the paper.
I understand this this is beautiful. This happens often, I know, in theater. I know this happens in jazz, in the music of jazz. The question of happy accident.
Yes.
I don't mean just improvisation. I mean something by the creator happens
now,
once he is equipped.
A great comedian has happy accidents happening all the time. You can get him into any situation unprepared, and he can make his cracks. And he has Zen in this way.
This is then
Yes.
is a form of Zen. He feels completely natural.
Yes.
Chaplin, let us say, in many of his moments, I'm sure, were not fully prepared, not fully in advance. Then there was a touch of Zen there.
That's right.
And great clowns.
Yes.
Right, there's a touch of Zen.
Yeah, so you see, after all, it's not something exotic that we have to import from Japan. One of the very best books that written about it is written by an English professor in Tokyo, and it's called Zen in English Literature. And it's illustrations of Zen from Dickens and Shakespeare and Wordsworth and Blake and Robert Louis Stevenson and so on. And it's a very good book. So, we can't learn anything if it has to be imported. There's a Chinese saying, that which comes in at the gate is not family treasure.
Wherever it is.
You have to have it in order to understand it. To him that hath shall be given.
To him that
Hath shall be given.
shall be given. So you have to have it to understand it.
Yes.
And I'm not going to ask this question, how do you get it? Because I asked in a different form earlier and was told. Now, if we may, back in Zen and the arts, I'm thinking there's something in your this excellent piece again. You speak of Zen, the Chinese Zen, as ordinary, nothing special. He is humorously, there's a humor here, is there not?
Yes.
In Zen. He is humorously human, like the Zen tramps portrayed by these two Chinese figures.
Liang Kai, yes.
And I was thinking of two other tramps in recent American drama, and I think of Waiting for Godot and Beckett, and I was curious. Is the writing of Beckett, now maybe I'm way off here, I think of the two tramps. I thought of the two tramps as the humor, and there's a sadness, and there was a naturalness, but there was something else involved there too. I felt resignation. Perhaps I'm wrong. Is there a Zen approach there to Beckett's writing and Waiting for Godot?
It's interesting, this. You always think Beckett is just about to make it. But there's more, isn't there, an element of a certain resignation? You see.
That's
Uh,
un-Zen-like.
Yes, it is, because in Zen you don't resign to nature. You discover there is nobody to resign to nature. In other words, man and nature are not apart from each other so that man has either to kick it around or resign to it. They are together, like the cork and the wave, or the hand and the fingers. And the Zen tramp is a kind of a symbol. You see, very often the fool and the wise man are the mirror images of each other. Very, very wise people sometimes seem foolish. Very, very great people sometimes look like sinners. And so the image of the drunk is often used. Spinoza, the philosopher, was called the God-intoxicated man. And the Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi has this story. He says, when a drunk man falls out of a cart, though he may suffer, he does not die. Because his spirit is in a condition of security, he is not aware of falling out of the cart or of riding in it, and so he does not suffer from contact with objective existences. If such security is from wine, how much more from spontaneity?
Now I understand your dedication in this book, The Way of Zen, by Alan Watts, an earlier book of yours, a mentor book. You say, as you were describing the drunk, who does not suffer because he does not at that moment have a self-conscious.
That's right.
You dedicated this to your three small children, to Tia, Mark, and Richard, who will understand it all the better for not being able to read it.
Yes, now let me tell you a specific story about that. There was a Chinese philosopher, a great student of Zen, who visited me just after that book came out. He took Tia, the little girl, aside and said to her, once upon a time there was a man who kept a goose in a bottle. It grew so large he couldn't get it out. Now he didn't want to break the bottle, and he didn't want to hurt the goose, so how will he get it out? And she said immediately, why don't be silly, break the bottle. And he said, you see, they always get the point under 7 years old. In other words, the question didn't block her. She saw it was a phony question instantly. An adult doesn't want to be outsmarted, thinks there's a trick in it, you see, and thinks there's some way of doing this perfectly impossible thing. So that's what the whole thing is, you see. Zen is setting up these problems that are called technically the koan. The koan is a meditation, a problem for meditation. But all these are traps for the unwary, setting you the sort of problems you might try and solve if you were foolish enough to attempt them.
I know, Dr. Alan Watts, you've been one of the most stimulating guests we've had in a long time, and one of the most provocative in a very quiet and yet sort of way that catches up on people. I feel pretty relaxed right now as I'm talking to you, and you haven't mesmerized me or hypnotized me or anything of the sort. It's just, I find the conversation intriguing. I think I dig. I don't really dig it, but I think I'm close to digging part of what Zen is. The question of practicing it would be something else indeed, I think, the difficulty.
Yes.
The difficulty.
But of course, our ordinary life presents us with all kinds of opportunities to practice. You don't necessarily have to sit on a mat, 24 hours a day and do it that way. The everyday things have the same opportunity.
When you spoke of Zen in the arts, you spoke of the mastery of craft itself, and I suppose there is perhaps craft is the wrong word to use, the daily craft of living. but the craft of being natural. It's not a craft, but am I getting myself in a bind here?
Yes, but you're
I am.
getting warm. You're beginning
I
to
am
cook
getting
with
warm.
gas, you see. Yeah, the point is to see, you can see these binds coming up and how we
Yes.
put ourselves into them.
Yes.
You see, the craft of being natural. How crafty can you
Yes.
get?
Yes. That's the wrong word, of course. This is a semantic cul-de-sac here.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I think we've got to have another session, Dr. Watts.
that'd be
This is
great.
marvelous. What is a way, a Zen way of saying, well, take it easy, but take it, which is my sign-off. What is a Zen way of saying goodbye? I suppose you'd say goodbye.
That's
Or
right.
is there just that?
Goodbye.
The natural thing. Dr. Watts, thank you very much. And I'm sure this is the surface we've scratched, is it not?
Yes. We could talk about this for a long, long time, but I'm not sure whether it wouldn't be better to stop and make it clearer that way.
To stop and make it clearer that way.
Yeah.
And so with Hamlet, we'll say, since you started at the beginning, we'll say the rest is silence.